Hello and welcome to this demo on writing REST APIs with Spring Boot. Today I want to show you how you can write proper REST APIs using Spring Boot. And I assume that you already understand what REST APIs are, or at least you understand what APIs are and you want to now write your APIs using REST. So I will not go into the details of explaining all of that. Maybe in some other video I can cover the basics. But here I want to show you the five common HTTP methods you would see with REST APIs. So you can see on the screen here, I have five methods. Usually there's more than these, but these are the common ones you would find with REST APIs. I have not yet found myself in a situation where I had to use something other than these five methods for writing a REST API or for writing a REST endpoint. And so I'll show you that today. On the screen here, you can see I have the first method is a GET. These are standard HTTP methods, just to be clear. The first one is a GET, which is used to retrieve data from the server. The second one is a POST, which is used to write data. The next one is a PUT, which is used to update existing data. So maybe you want to change the name of some field. And the next one is patch, which is used to write a portion of data. And the next one is delete, which is used to delete a resource from the server. Now, I just want to emphasize the difference between put and patch. Well, people use it differently, but to me, the preference is always use put when you want to update the entire data set. So you want to change everything. And always use patch when you're working with very large data sets and you want to update just a small portion of your results. So in our case, we will be using put because we are dealing with very small objects, and it just makes sense to update the entire object rather than updating one field. Before we get our hands dirty with the code, I want to show you this as well. I have checked in this source code into a Bitbucket repository. It's a public repository, so you can go ahead and clone the project and experiment with it a little. And with that said, I'm going to jump right into the code and show you what's there. So I have a Spring Boot project here. I've gone ahead and created certain things that I will need. For example, a persistence unit. In this case, I'm using a JSON file because I didn't want to create an entire database just for this demonstration. The next one is I have a service layer here with my implementation for different things. So get all the product hotels. Well, I missed these, but the project we are going to be working on today. So we're going to be creating an API that helps people find hotels, right? So the user or the owner of the platform can create different hotels, update existing ones or delete ones that are no longer there. And his users can come query the API and get a list of hotels or find a specific hotel and they get the address. So I'm keeping it simple for now, nothing too fancy. So I'll go ahead and start. I'll close all of these. I don't want you to be focused on the service layer or anything else. I want us to be focused on the controllers, which is where we define the actual endpoints. So I'll go ahead and create a controller here and I'll say hotel. So I have a convention. Well, not just me, but many people use this convention as well. When you create something you name. So I'm using hotel because I'm working with hotels. So I know this is a controller for dealing with hotels. And then I say REST, it's a REST and controller. It's that simple. And I click. So it's a controller. What do I do? I start by annotating it with the @REST controller. This simply tells Spring how to treat this. So because I've annotated that with the REST controller, Spring knows how to deal with this. So Spring is going to create a bean out of this, but let's not go into the details of all of this. Probably we'll talk about that some other time. And the next thing I want to do is I want to create a mapping. So I'm going to give it a default mapping of hotel. And this is going to be part of my URI when we query the endpoints. And then I'll go ahead and create my first method, and that will be public. I'll return a response entity from it. Response entity. And I'll call it get all. So when I want to get a list of hotels, this is the method I'm going to call. And to make sure that it is called via the get, I will annotate it with the @get mapping annotation. And I would call my service layer, and I'll say return response entity dot status. So I'll say HTTP status. Okay, meaning everything is okay. And then I will do body. And now I need to use the service that I defined earlier, this one. So I get the list of hotels from the persistence unit. So I would inject the service here. It's also a Spring Bean at AutoWired. And I would say hotel service, hotel service. And I will use my injected service here now. I'll say hotel service.getAll, which will return me a list of all hotels. Now I have this, okay, it's throwing an exception. So I'll just add the exception to my method signature here. And to handle that, so you can see, I'm just returning okay. So I'm assuming everything is going to be okay here. But in case there is an error, I'm going to make this controller extend my REST exception handler, which I created. Exception handler. And here we go. It's going to take care of the different kinds of exceptions, but you don't need to worry about this for now. We're focused on the APIs. So this is set. I'm going to create another endpoint here at get mapping, still a get mapping, but this one is now for returning a specific hotel. So I would say value, and that will be the ID that will be passed as part of the request. And I would do this public. So now define the method response entity, also returns response entity. And this one will be get, since it's getting one user. And because we need the ID of the user, I'm going to get the ID as a path variable. Path variable, and the name of that path variable will be ID. And the variable itself here will be long, and I'll call it ID. And then I'll do the same thing here. I'll return response entity dot status dot HTTP status okay. HTTP status okay. And the body, but this time I will use the hotel service, and I'll call the method that gets one user. So get, and I'll pass in the ID. And this one also throws an exception. So I will add the exception to the method signature. So now we have methods for retrieving all hotels and individual hotels. But first we need to add a hotel before we can start retrieving, right? So I'll go ahead and write another one at post mapping. So we said the post mapping, post HTTP method is used for posting data, adding new resources to the server. So I'll write a post method that we use to add hotels, and I'll do add. And this time, since the JSON object will come as the body of the request, I'm going to do add request body, saying that I want the body of the request to be passed and mapped into the hotel entity that I created. And I'm going to return response entity dot status and HTTP status okay. And then I do body, and this time I will call the add method in the hotel service class. Add hotel service, sorry, not hotel, service.add, and I will add the hotel that I passed in, and I would let it add the method definition, the exception to the definition of the method signature. And with that done, I think now we are ready to test the first part of the application. So what do? I will go ahead and run this. So I'll run this. Okay, now that it's run, I've built it successfully. So after building, now I run the jar file and it's deploying. That's the good thing about Spring Boot. I don't need a server, right? I can just run the jar locally and everything works. Okay, so I have done that. I'm going to bring up Postman now. I would create a new HTTP request and I'll start with get. So my domain is at localhost. So you can see here the domain. This is your standard domain name right up to the port, and hotel is what I passed into my REST controller as the mapping. So that's the first path. And since I'm using a get request, it's going to match with this one because it sees hotel, and now it looks for that a get method. Since the method is a get method that corresponds with that, and it's this one. This one does not correspond because it has an ID that has to be passed in. We'll see that shortly. So I click, and right now I have no hotels, right? So what do? I need to add a hotel first. So I'll go to Postman still. I change these to post. I'm just going to make sure I have all the right headers, and my content type header. So content type header should be application JSON, since we are working with REST and we use JSON. And then what do? I go to the body of the request, raw, and I will paste the object I want to create. I created some objects here, some hotels here. So first hotel, send. So it has been created. So if I change this to a get method now, you're going to see that again. You see it here. So I'm going to go ahead and create 2 more hotels just so we see clearly what we're doing. Sorry, I need to use post when I'm creating. So you see hotel number 2, and then I create the last one, and save it. So hotel number 3. Now if I change my method to get and I run this again, now you see all the hotels that were here. Now if I do /1 and then it's a get request, you see it retrieves the first hotel, and you can see my data store here, which was the file I mentioned. So you see it getting updated. So what have we done? We have created a REST API that permits us to create hotels and list hotels or retrieve a specific hotel. But if I try to do put, you're going to get an error, for example, because we have not defined any endpoint to handle put. So you see method not allowed. So the next thing we will do now is add the put and delete methods. And for that, I will not type it in. I'll just go ahead and paste it and then explain what we have happening there. So I'll copy both put and put and delete. So here, what do I have? I have a put mapping, which takes in the hotel and an ID from the path, and calls the update service and does the same thing and returns. And a delete that takes in the ID and looks for that resource and deletes it from the database or from my file in this case. Now, what I want you to pay attention to is we are using the same URL. If I go to the Word PowerPoint document I had earlier, if I just go back, so you see that in almost every case, we're using the same URL. For example, you can see the put, the patch, the delete, and the get when we get a specific item. We're using the same URL. And for the get all and post, we're using the same URL. So what's important here is, first of all, your URL, the way you define your URL, it's very specific, but we'll not talk about now, but just know that your URL identifies a resource, and you could identify multiple resources or a specific resource. In this case, hotel identifies any resource that's a hotel. And when you add the ID, it pertains to that particular hotel. And you see that the HTTP method becomes very important, because depending on the method, you do something else on an object. If it's get, we retrieve the object. If it's put, we update the object. If it's delete, we delete the object. If it's suppose, we don't have an ID, which means we have to create a new object. So I'll go back here, and you can see my delete method. I've put it in there, the same thing, and you see that it takes the ID, and the put update method takes the ID as well. So now let's do an example to see how that works. For that to happen, I'll go ahead and rebuild the project. I'll go ahead and rebuild the project. And once the build is complete, I run the jar file, and okay, it's up. So I'll do a quick get to make sure that my server is still up. Okay, so now what do I want? I want to update this hotel number 1, right? So I'm going to be using a put method, and I'll change the address to, or I'll just change this to allow XYZ, and I'll change the phone number here to a series of zeros. And now when I run this, you see that the hotel has been updated. If I do a list of all my hotels now, a get, and I'm going to take this out, and now you can see that the I love hotel has been updated. We can change hotel Deville as well. I'm going to put it like this. So hotel Deville is number 2, and I'll just copy its own information here. So I'll keep everything as is, and I'll just update the email. A little formatting there. And instead of saying service, I'll just say support, right? And yeah, I'll change this to a bunch of tools as well, right? Okay, and now, so I want to update this one. Again, I use put. And now if I go back and list all my hotels using the get method, there we go. You see, this one got updated as well. You can see the email change and the phone number changed. And last but not least, I would execute the delete, where I use the delete method. And I will be deleting hotel number 1. It does not matter what's here. I'll be deleting hotel number 1. And so when I run this, it comes back as true, meaning my delete was successful. So if I run get again, I see that hotel number 1 is no longer there, not found. And if I list all my hotels, we have just 2. And if we go to the data file as well, you will see that we have just 2. And that was it. I hope I was able to make that short enough. But that's all. So see you some other time.